This is a podcast by the News Minute, and you are listening to South Central.
Welcome to South Central, a TNM podcast where we put the South at the center. I'm Dhanya Rajendran, your host. As you can see, if you're watching and not just listening, I'm not in the Bengaluru studio. Pooja Prasanna is sitting alone in the studio. Pooja, our reporting head of the News Minute and the anchor of Let Me Explain. Welcome to South Central.
Thank you, Dhanya. When are you back?
I am in Kochi because I'm waiting for the judgment in the Dilip case that's bound to come on the 12th of December, which is when this episode will air. Yeah. And I will plan a few interviews and then come back. Okay, so this week, our coverage has been largely on the Dilip case and the judgment on it. We have published 5 profiles, stories that we have worked on for many months. Do read them. And in case you're not into reading, most of these profiles have been explained in a video format also. The profiles are on Judge Hani Varghese, on lawyer Raman Pillai, who represented Dilip, on Dilip himself, the cop Baiju Paulos, who investigated the case, and most importantly, a very long interview with the criminal who has been accused of this crime, Pulsar Suni. Nidhi Suresh spoke to him for almost 13 months to understand why someone would take up this kind of a contract, and does he have any remorse, or what does he feel about the crime? Okay, so most of these stories are behind a paywall, but I hope it is worth your time and subscription. Do read them and do write to us at southcentral@thenewsminute.com. Pooja, let's go to the headlines.
We start from Karnataka. Congress government tables hate speech bill in Karnataka Assembly. This has happened yesterday. That's the 10th of December. We have access to copy of that, and we will be putting out detailed copies on why this is so problematic. But this is called Karnataka Hate Speech and Hate Crimes Prevention and Control Bill of 2025. It is essentially a tool that can be used against everyone. Dhanya, one question many people are asking, when there are enough sections in BNS now, why do you need another bill that is so draconian to go after just hate speech and misinformation that will be misused for sure, isn't it?
So there are two thoughts here. Some people believe that we should have specific legislation for hate speech itself and to deal with hate speech and hate crime. Now, that aside, even if you have a legislation, how do you deal with this is a question. There are so many problems with this bill that one can point out. One, of course, is that they have defined hate speech, then they've defined hate crime, and then they've included hate speech within hate crime, and what is punishable is hate crime. So why this very circular way of defining hate speech, putting it to hate crime, and then giving punishment for hate crime? And if you see what the bill says is that the punishment for hate crime is 1 to 7 years. That is because there are the Arnesh Kumar guidelines which say that if somebody is booked for a crime for less than 7 years, then arrest is not necessary. So in most of these cases, the government, the political party, etc. wants to send a signal by imprisoning people even for a short period of time. So that, I think, it's a circumvent that a lot of legal experts are saying they've added 1 to 7 as the punishment. And the final thing, for me personally, the most problematic is the fact that they have given the powers to a government officer to take down content. This is something that we have been fighting with the union government also in various bills, from the digital media bill, digital media rules, to so many other bills. They have given this draconian power to government officers to take down content, and this government in Karnataka is just repeating that.
Another headline from Karnataka, this is our Deepavali. Darshan's fans rally massive support for The Devil release. That's his latest movie. Let's not forget that this is a man who's accused of murder. And what we've seen over the last few days is from viral social media campaigns to a message sent from jail. Darshan supporters reflect the tendency within fandoms to celebrate the persona. They are just completely overlooking the fact that he's in jail, not because of some heroic act, but has been accused of murder. I'm sure you all remember that there was some special privileges given to him inside jail as well. And after the pictures came out, all of them were revoked. But Dhanya, this is just like a very disturbing trend we've seen time and again, isn't it?
No, I don't know what these actor fan clubs think. I mean, are these people who keep their brains in the refrigerator while going out through their day? I don't understand. This Darshan is so problematic that imagine his fellow inmates in Parapana Agrahara jail have complained that he's harassing them. and they have asked for transfer out of the same jail cell. That is the kind of guy he is. And everybody is just celebrating his movie. Do read this nice profile that Shivani Kawa had done about Darshan, his growth in Kannada cinema, and why he represents his toxic masculinity in cinema, and he's celebrated for it.
Moving to Tamil Nadu, lottery baron Martin's son floats a new political party. We had earlier reported this in a weekly political newsletter called Power Trip. You can access it only if you are a subscriber to the News Minute. So it's worth your while. Once a week, we come with very, very exclusive stories, not gossip, not rumors, but things that are relevant. On October 29th, we had reported that Charles Martin, who's the son of the lottery baron, had started building a political base in Puducherry. And this has been now completely validated. Tanya, this is one of the very many, I'm going to blow our trumpet a little bit here, very many things that we have reported that have come true later.
Yeah, that's true. And this is one party which will have no dearth of money. Only thing is other parties will be sad because their donations will come down.
Well, not necessarily. Maybe he'll still end up giving because he wants favors in different states. So yeah, let's see how that goes. Kausalya alleges DMK failed to act on Shankar's caste killing appeal. This is a very, very disturbing story. Kausalya is the wife of a Dalit engineer by the name Shankar who was killed in a caste killing. And she's accused the DMK government of stalling justice by delaying the appeal in Supreme Court against her father's acquittal. This is something that we had followed quite closely. The visuals, if you remember, were very, very shocking. It was caught on CCTV camera. You're in touch with her, right, Tanya? What does she have to say now?
I mean, Kausalya is someone who's really fought against all odds. And this was one of those attacks in Tamil Nadu where it was not just the man who was attacked. They tried to kill her too, but she somehow escaped. She's an anti-caste activist in the state now. And her father was convicted by a lower court, but then acquitted by the high court, saying that the criminal conspiracy cannot be proven. So she is saying that the DMK, basically the prosecution, has not tried to file the appeal properly or to make sure it's numbered. And this has been a constant criticism about the DMK, right? That when it comes to issues relating to Dalits, there is a lot of talk, but there is less action. And Kausalya gave an interview to Shabir. It is in Tamil, but she makes her point very clearly that why has the appeal not gone? And let's remember, this is a young woman who's asking for the state to appeal against the acquittal of her own father.
Another headline, this time from Kerala, judgment leaked is one question many people are asking because key details of actor assault case verdict had come out a week before. Association President Yashwant Shenoy has confirmed that the association did receive a letter and it was forwarded to the Chief Justice for appropriate action. This is again putting the spotlight on the judiciary. There has been so many questions raised on how Justice Hani M. Verghese has behaved. This is another controversy. Do we know anything more on this, Tanya?
Not really. And I'm telling you, this is just an anonymous letter. I don't think anything is going to happen around it except for maybe news reports for 2 days. And there's, of course, now a controversy as to why the association president forwarded the letter to CJ. Because when you forward a letter, you somehow put it on record, right? So the association is disagreeing with its president's activities.
Not aware, not accepting. That's what Shashi Tharoor says as he distances himself from the Savarkar Award. Now, there was a row that erupted over rumors that Congress MP is still in Congress. Congress MP Shashi Tharoor being felicitated with Veer Savarkar Award. Now, Shashi Tharoor says that he was not consulted before announcing this and he will not be accepting it because he never agreed to it in the first place. But yes, that part where I said he's still in Congress is interesting because he was also there attending the Putin dinner when other members of the opposition were not invited, only he was. So we need to see where that goes. Moving on to Telangana, Trump Media Group to anchor $5 billion investment in Telangana's future city. The Trump Media's group investment will focus on smart and intelligent cities, secure digital infrastructure, AI-enabled governance systems, and immersive media technologies, the government has said. You know, this is a Congress government in Telangana, but it is just the positions it's taken is so divergent because they're also renaming a road after Trump. Here is a government that is bending backwards for the US president two other things, they also took money from Adani, a group that, the Congress has been going against. And I also read that there will be a Vantara, the wildlife sanctuary. There will be something similar to that in Telangana. So what's really happening? Revant Reddy is still a Congress chief minister, but behaves not like one. Moving on to another headline, which puts the contrast very, very clearly. Underfunded, overburdened. Telangana higher education lags behind. The rich-poor gap, staff shortages and low budgets emerge as key concerns in the report. So you have, billions of dollars coming in for investment for AI-enabled governments, but you can't actually fund government schools and government public health and education, which is just so telling of the times we live in. Telugu state, number 2, Andhra, TTD orders inquiry into 54 crore shawl fraud. The TTD has ordered a comprehensive inquiry by the state's Anti-Corruption Bureau into the alleged 54 crore fraud in the supply of shawls between 2015 and 2025. Now, this spans across both the TDP and the YSRCP government's time. Tanya, this just doesn't seem to be ending, right?
What is a shawl scheme? I've not read about it. Like they give shawls in TTD?
So they've, in procurement of shawls, they're saying that money has been misappropriated. 54 crores is what they're saying. We have to see what comes out. After the laddu and ghee, now shawl also under scanner.
Is there anything that is being corrupted in TTD? I want to know.
Yeah. Goa nightclub owners fled to Thailand hours after deadly fire, the police say. Important to note that this is an Indigo flight. I saw memes that, thousands of Indigo flights have been grounded, didn't take off. This is one flight that shouldn't have taken off, but it did. But, jokes apart, 25 people died in this very, very horrible tragedy. And the two brothers who run that nightclub were just allowed to leave. And now the police are saying that they just left hours after the fire. Why were they not stopped? Will they be brought back? What is being done to bring them back from Thailand? These are questions that need to be answered. Another important headline, the Supreme Court reserves verdict on bail pleas of Sharjeel Imam, Umar Khalid in the larger conspiracy case. If you remember, in around September of 2020, many student leaders, including the two names I mentioned, along with Gulshifa and several others, were arrested, claiming that they were part of a larger conspiracy in the Delhi riots case. Important to note that people who were part of other kind of sloganeering, also who called for shooting of certain people, today sit as union ministers in the Modi government, while these people are still in jail and the trial hasn't even begun. They're still framing charges 5 years after that. So without a trial, over 5 years spent in jail. That's it for this week, Danya, the headlines.
Okay, so we've been saying that through December, we're going to have discussions, not on any headline, but a look back at how things have panned out in 2025. So last week, we discussed about democracy, secularism, and communalism in India. This week, we're going to look at investigative journalism. How has 2025 been for both mainstream and independent media? And how do we look ahead? How do we make better investigative reports, media houses coming together, etc.? So joining us for that are three investigative journalists themselves. Josie Joseph joins us from Delhi. Josie, thank you for joining us on South Central. You've only spoken to us on News Laundry's Hafta, never on South Central. So
thank you. Yeah.
Here the anchors talk lesser. Yeah.
I'll pass it to Abhinandan. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And there's Rama Nagarajan, who works with the Times of India, who has done some really brilliant investigations when it comes to the health sector. Rama, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Nikita Saxena, investigative journalist who's worked with many organizations, including the Caravan. Nikita, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so first we will just have a look back at what struck each of you as good investigative journalism this year. Some of the stories done. And I think we should discuss not just about the English media, but if you can think of examples, even from the regional media. I don't know if there are too many examples in front of us, but there have been pockets of good work, I think, here and there. All of us would eventually agree that, yes, more and more needs to be done because the investment in investigative journalism has really come down, especially in big media houses. So, Josie, I will go with you first. what have your thoughts been on 2025?
I think like the last few years, this year too has been, in my mind, a very um, encouraging year for investigative journalism. I'm not talking about the mainstream. Mainstream, there have been exceptions like Rama on sectors like health. People have done some fantastic work. But when I'm talking about investigations here, I'm talking more about those which have direct implications for democracy or the health of democracy. And I think, for example, the entire Bihar reporting by the independent media, journalists, the Reporters Collective, by News Minute, News Laundry, Wire, etc., have been outstanding. I think the opposition failed to use it to improve, set the agenda and hold election commission and the government accountable. But the fact is that it was meticulously done, and I think they were all the reporting were far very rigorous and very rooted from the ground and using those technology. There have been other instances like the Newsman and Niti's investigation into Dileep's case in Kerala, both the copies, which I think Nikita and you were anchoring and editing. These are some of the things that stood out. I think also the investigations, the continuing investigations into the favoritism that government is showering on Adani Group by independent media has also been outstanding. And in fact, it's unfortunate that even when it comes to national security, compromises being done for Adani, those are not being set agenda in the nation. And I think the journalists can only investigate. It is the politicians, opposition, the civil society which has to take it to the people, which is where the failure is. And I think to me, overall this year, we should be happy. I'm very happy that at least one institution, when I say this, I'm not even talking about the mainstream media, I'm talking about the independent media space. At least one institution and few individuals and small organizations in this country continue to have and uphold their belief in democracy and the need for holding power accountable, despite the ongoing constant harassment and very embarrassing meekness of judiciary.
Okay, so we are starting on a positive note. I think Josie called this the golden era of investigative journalism a few days ago at the Media Rumble. But is everybody else feeling so positive? Rama, what are your thoughts on what we saw in 2025? I know that health is one sector where, especially after COVID, we have seen some really fantastic work by health reporters, including yourself at the Times of India. You have done investigations on the cough syrup industry, how they have been, operating without following rules, which is resulting in these deaths. You're someone who's spoken about this for many years. We have Tabassum of The Scroll, Banjot from The Wire, Vidya Krishnan, who's written for many publications. All women journalists, because at one point of time, health, I guess, would be seen as a soft beat. If you can also talk about that. And then from the COVID times onwards, it becomes this really hard investigative beat too, right?
Yeah, so I think in health, we have never had a dearth of investigative reports. The only problem is that health, you can keep writing about it, but I don't think the government really takes it seriously. I have never seen too many things change because of very good reporting. So it's a little bit like hitting a wall. But having said that, yes, we must say that MCI was disbanded because of, I guess, years of reporting on the corruption in MCI. But it's been replaced by an even more corrupt, even more inept organization, National Medical Commission. So things like that. It's always two steps forward, one step back. And most of the other very serious issues that we are seeing, like large-scale privatization of public resources, like public hospitals, which is happening. And it's happening in both opposition states as well as the central government, ruling party. So then what happens is that nobody wants to touch it with a barge pole. So that issue doesn't get picked up at all, no matter how often you report on it. In Hindi, I think they've done fabulous reporting. Dainik Bhaskar has done very good work. They've got an extensive network of reporters, so they end up doing the best stories often, much better than many of the English media, all of us put together. There's Rajasthan Patrika, which does excellent work from Rajasthan. Again, much bigger reach, very good reports. But again, the same old problem that I don't see health issues which are being reported having the kind of impact you would have liked to see. Like Dainik Bhaskar, I think, filed the best stories on the cough syrup issue from Madhya Pradesh. They had people on the ground who dug up everything. English media was basically just following after it was reported in Hindi. But other than that, I think drug pricing is one. I mean, all these are public issues. So one good thing is that mainstream media is definitely going to cover this because this affects the readership. People who read, especially people who are English speaking, who read English media. So a lot of it does get covered. But the things which don't get covered are things like privatization, because that doesn't affect most of these people, except when they're sending their children to medical college or something like that when the fees is too high. Except for that, I mean, the fact that privatization is going to put health beyond the reach of 90%, 95% of this country, that hardly gets any traction. And we are seeing every public resource, land, already existing hospitals, all of it being handed over to private sector with very few questions being asked, MOUs being signed which are not in the public domain, all of these.
But Rama, someone would think that when we do reporting on health, and like you yourself said, these are issues affecting everyone, right? Including the readers. And the outrage, for example, when the cough syrup deaths happen, there is a cycle of outrage for 3-4 days. You would think that it is something like that which the government would readily act on than a lot of other investigations which are about privatization or corporatization, monopoly, etc.
So government has, I think, perfected this technique of, immediately issuing statements saying that we are launching an investigation, we are suspending drug controllers, but very cleverly hiding the fact that they haven't talked about who inspected that Srishan Pharmaceuticals from where the cough syrup was manufactured, who was a drug inspector who did it, why aren't those inspection reports out in public domain, why do we have zero information about inspections? I mean, why don't all state drug controllers as well as CDSU, Central Drug Controller, have websites where they log all the inspections that they do? I mean, that transparency that is required. So none of that happened, despite, so many kids having died. All that they did was suspend few guys, as always, at the bottom, and none of the guys at the top get touched. And on top of it, they diverted the issue to arresting the doctor, talking about the doctor and what the problem with, people prescribing, without talking about the fact that if such medicines are available in the market, which can kill you, it's primarily the responsibility of the government. It's a failing of the government. And just sacking a few people or suspending them is not going to solve the problem.
Nikita, you next. What are your observations about 2025?
I feel like we began the year, with the killing of Mukesh Chandrakar, the journalist from Chhattisgarh who was reporting on illegal construction there. We also saw the assault on Sneha Barve this year from Maharashtra, who was also reporting on, illegal construction near Pune. And we've also seen attacks against the reporters who have been investigating Adani in courts. And we've also seen just last month some relief, right? Ravi Nair, Ayush Sharma, Abir Das Gupta, the court provided them some relief and said that, okay, there can't be an ex parte injunction. So as I guess with any year, it feels like a year in which there have been some wins and losses for journalists, I'm saying outside of the stories themselves. So for instance, Reporters Collective, Malini Subramaniam, along with 2 other journalists, did a fantastic piece following up on not just the circumstances leading up to Mukesh Chandrakar's death, but also on the very case that he was reporting. Typically the kind of stories maybe that you would see forbidden stories reporting on, like they did, for instance, after Gauri Lankesh's death, to follow up on the stories of journalists who've been attacked. We've also seen, similar to I think what Rama was saying, we've also seen instances in which I think there has been meticulous and rigorous reporting. And what has fallen through after that is how fastidiously mainstream media chooses to address the case. So for instance, February this year is when News Minute and News Laundry published the Kiran Bedi tapes, which was years of reporting, extremely rigorous work in terms of showing recorded conversations, pointing to a potentially very, very serious lapse in the investigation of the sexual assault case of the Swiss diplomat. What we saw right after was not follow-ups on the story was not any kind of reporting that was able to nudge the police into looking back into what could be a potential lead. What we saw instead were a number of interviews with Kiran Bedi justifying the act of surveilling her daughter as a parent's care. So the story itself, I think, was strong. It stood. Kiran Bedi didn't deny anything. But the amount of scrutiny to the story was just then restricted to responses from her instead of the case itself. In the last week alone, I think we've had some very, very encouraging pieces of journalism. So starting with the Leap case, where, of course, Nidhi's had her 2 stories, including the one published this week. News Minute has had a stellar bunch of reports that have profiled the judge, that have profiled the prosecutor, that have looked at the case from all angles. You have the RSS database that's going to come out today, which is going to potentially show us the sort of network of 2,500 organizations that are affiliated with the Sangh, which is very much, again, a collaborative effort, with independent journalists and researchers and Sciences Po. And you have Sukanya Shanta from The Wire, who is right now publishing very, very interesting reports on the NIA, which are looking at what is behind their successful, rate of convictions and how people are seem to be coerced into confessions of guilt. You've also had the acquittal of those who were accused in the July 2011 Bombay blast case earlier this year. And that, I think, to me, it may not be a result of stories this year, but has certainly been one of those examples where you can see that journalism was constantly puncturing the state's narrative. I mean, for instance, in Rosie's book, it opens with Wahid, who's one of the accused. So I think I would agree with Rosie that by and large, I feel encouraged. Again, also with the special intensive revision reporting, where we saw, just 10, 12 journalists, and not just those from metro cities, but they were collaborating with journalists from Bihar who published report after report in a collective, effort published by multiple independent media outlets that constantly showed us the way in which the SIR was increasing the kind of toll that especially marginalized people were facing in accessing a very fundamental right. So yeah, I think it's been an interesting year.
So I think Maharashtra is going slightly the Gujarat way, where journalists are either bought off or silenced in multiple ways. I think they're in view of that, I think there's this one reporter, Amey Tirotkar, who works at Frontline. He's done some fantastic journalism, exposing what's happening on ground, the infrastructure deals. Adani was one of the players, but there are several others. How they're changing the very shape of Bombay. Most people now believe that more than half of Bombay's real estate is sold to 2 or 3 players. So he's done a fantastic job. So I loved his work. Nikita, what you mentioned, the Reporter Collective's work on, I think the headline was What Killed Mukesh Chandrakar. That was a brilliant piece of investigation. There is also this website called The File, which reports in Karnataka, in Kannada. They've been doing some good work. And while it doesn't, it's mostly document based. And while they're not able to prove conclusively what they're accusing, I think it's a great tip-off point to look at what's happening otherwise, because Karnataka also has brought in some very contentious things in terms of laws and stuff. And of course, the latest is the Scrolls piece on political funding, how Tata's gained right after their donation. And this has been a pattern where political donation has been put under scrutiny. But yes, for me, what has been disappointing, yes, all of this is bright and very encouraging. I share your enthusiasm and optimism. But, up until, say, about 7-8 years ago, if even there is a small column in a newspaper that could be converted into a campaign by a mainstream news channel, that would have been done. Every piece of big news would be seen as a potential investigative story, starting from a stampede to people getting pensions. Everything was looked at it from that lens. I don't see that happening anymore. And that's perhaps why we don't see action, because the government knows that they can brand us as, fringe or anti-nationals or, agents of foreign governments and what have you, and get away with it. We saw how they brushed off that Adani series that we saw where Ravi and Anand and Hindenburg, all of them put together very, very conclusive reports. So I think that is a huge failure, and the country is paying for it because when do we see, the mainstream media picking up? When certain spokespersons sit and address a press conference dissing and giving half information, diverting attention. That's when mainstream media covers it. So I think that's a huge disservice, and the country is paying the price for it. Danya, what are yours?
I follow a lot of the stories which people do in languages also. So I think what needs to, you all have listed the investigative work being done by primarily English and Hindi, but I really wish that there was more work in the regional media, because that's where impact can be, right? For example, the Prajwal Revanna tapes here in Karnataka, it was initially brought out by a Kannada channel. The way they did is very questionable. Their intention is questionable, but the fact is they did bring it out. But I only wish that there were better ways in which that journalism is being done. It is not in a way which is just, I'm saying, perverted. There's no other word to use for that. A lot of journalism in the regional media also is not making impact just because of the way it is done. And they're also in this format of 24-hour news, right? So they just move on from something really important, from something they can really build on, to just the next development, which is a mango has fallen from a tree. So I want to pick on what Pooja said and come to you, Josie, that there is a problem here, right? Like in pockets, people are doing good investigative journalism. There is no doubt about that. So when I used to work for a TV channel, and I worked there for 8 years, the editor used to say in the morning that there's this investigative story that's come in the Indian Express. Nobody reads the Express enough, so we will take it up. So initially I used to think, really, nobody reads the Express enough? Why should a TV channel take it up? But then I realized the quality of a TV channel, where they just go behind something, hammer, right? So it goes on for 3-4 days. And then eventually they are so dogged about it that they want an impact out of it. So they just go. I'll cite an example of a union minister. I don't want to take names, but this union minister was in a scam during the UPA times. And this channel, which is my channel, had gone behind him. And the minister called and spoke to me and the editor and said in a very warning tone that, you journalists, you will be there just for a day, but we will be there forever, politicians. And the editor said, I will make sure that you are not there. They went on the story, I'm telling you, for almost 20 days leading up to his eventual resignation, because the government could not, just ignore that noise, right? Every day you're on TV from 7 in the morning to 11 in the night, just saying, why is he not resigning? And the pressure built up. But today we don't see I don't see mainstream echoing that work, right? What the independent media is doing, even mainstream is doing. For example, the stories which Times of India did on the cough syrup, or Dainik Bhaskar did on, I think it is Dainik Bhaskar who did a story about how hundreds of crores of rupees are going into donations to smaller parties which don't even contest elections. So whose binami are they? But it is not being picked up. Is that one impediment we are facing, Josie?
I think what you said is a retail version of the real impediment that we're facing. We are facing almost a mafia kind of state. And to give credit where it is due, Narendra Modi must be given the credit to showing us how easy it is to centrally control and manipulate the mainstream media ecosystem. The saddest thing is that we are all tired of reading the obituaries of the journals dead inside many of our contemporaries, and how they are all becoming, mouthpieces for government. I think what we are seeing, the lethargy or the lack of interest in mainstream to follow up stories, or the inability of the stories to make impact, is to do with the larger architecture that the Modi regime has imposed on India, which is centralized control, weak institutions, and intimidate anyone who is around. I think it's purely criminal. The solution to such subversion of democracy and capture of state is not in lamenting on social media press conferences. It is the job. That is where the opposition and the civil society comes. They should be on the ground. So I think blaming the mainstream media is only one part of the problem. But mainstream media is also in a state where not just the quality has gone down, it is also in crisis because of the technological changes, the landscape is transforming. But the fact that all their skeletons, or at least many of the skeletons in their cupboards, are able to be used by a government, and we have been hearing the name of that somebody in PMO who sends out what to be reported and what not to be reported to editors and owners, is telling. So what I'm saying is, I think the solution, which is going back to those days when people like me used to be woken up by India's so-called famous anchors and reporters asking for documents or interviews, etc., will only come back when we have a government which is more democratic and respects democracy. There is utter lack of respect for democracy in this system. They can hold parliament sessions on Vande Mataram, or they can make all the slogans, but the fact is that we are in the worst phase of democracy outside of emergency era of 75-77, and only when we come out of it, which means only in a post-Modi era will we see independent journalism or university journalism flourishing in this country. Until then, it's a state capture. We can all lament about retail problems. Oh, media is weak. Oh, someone like Arun Puri, whom a lot of us looked up to in our young days, doing what he's doing today. All that we can do, those are retail problems. But the wholesale problem, the elephant in the room, is the state capture by an legitimately elected government and subverting democracy and its heads. And I think we are seeing this across the world in many countries, including the US.
For me, there's another worrying aspect. Yes, the government obviously doesn't want leaks, so they have put plugs wherever required, unlike the UPA, which did not manage to do it. But the erosion of public trust, right? Every time there is an investigation report from an independent, website, it is seen with so much suspicion, and they successfully managed to push this narrative that this is against the interest of the country. Whereas the truth is the exact opposite. In that they use the so-called mainstream media, they use social media, they use whatever opinion makers and influencers they can. Isn't that a bigger damage, because we don't know where this will go?
I think it's a misreading of the situation. What's happening is that, yes, the loud noise is being made, questioning the credibility or the reality of the story and the people behind it. But the fact is that the majority of this country are sitting quiet and they appreciate what we do. The unfortunate part is a Newsminute or a Wire or Scroll or can't reach 1 billion people. You only reach a very small echo chamber of people. So, for example, I did a book 10 years ago called The Feast of Vultures. And even today, when there is an airline, this Indigo complete mess, I can see the book is conversation. One of the leading conversations is around the book. And I mean, I don't see that kind of. So every time there is corruption, I see a wave of discussion around the books I've written. So it's not that, but public are just tired. The majority of India is very tired of dealing with an irresponsible government, which is both partially mafia and partially vindictive and also useless. So the fact is that there is joblessness. The people are tired. This country is tired. You go down to the market and try talking to somebody with politics. They will just abuse and walk away because where are the jobs? There are no jobs. Indigo, people are stranded in tarmac. What does the government do here? Nothing. Government did not zero thing, right? The government is not bothered. Delhi is choking in this gas chamber. They will all sit next to air purifiers and they do nothing. So there is actually no accountability. And I think a lot of confidence for them comes from the fact that they are controlling the election commission. They are able to control electoral process. So we are in a slightly different state. So the loud noises that we are hearing is the artificial the screen that they're creating from paid trolls and their subservient mainstream media. I think the majority of India is just quiet, is tired.
Actually, on the point of Indigo, I saw some channels doing a campaign, so to speak, and they pinned it on the TDP. But it would have been so easy for them to actually conduct an investigation because they have the access, they have the resources, just to see how we got here. And that would actually resonate with the people because there was a lot of anger. I didn't see that anywhere.
Then the question will go to the government.
Exactly.
Something like Indigo also comes down like to monopolies, right? And that's the other thing that I think even within the media, the increasing corporatization and it's multi-pronged, because also this is the year in which we've seen the Right to Information Act get defunct just months ago. And
Watch your tongue. There are only two kinds of journalists in India who are already working for Adani and Ambani, or those are going to work for it also.
Though I mean, and Adani has now, along with Top India, also been named a media predator by an international organization, right? Reporters Sans Frontiers has named them as media predators. And we hardly have any conversation about it, because half our conversation is coming from channels or publications owned by corporates. Like a recent story, which is, it's not even investigative, so which is, I think it's so instructive. Anupama Chopra did a somewhat critical review of this Dhurandhar that has come out, and the capture of like film industries is a whole other thing. And the review has been removed, and News Laundry has done the story on how the Sanjeev Goenka, RPSGF Goenka group, which owns Hollywood Reporter India, also owns Saregama. So you can't even have something that's mildly criticizing a clearly propagandist film anymore. So investigated, then you also have Anant Goenka, who's Instagramming about sitting with his mother's favorite breakfast or dinner guest, which is Mohan Bhagwat. On the other hand, you have this, and he's the proprietor of this publication that aims to be the journalism of courage, right? So I feel like there are also a lot of willing acquiescence.
Yeah, but you have to give credit to them, no? They also brought the Prime Minister to lecture on Ramnath Goenka, give the lecture.
I'll just go back to Rama now. Rama, tell me, how do you feel newsrooms should go ahead? I mean, everybody else here is not a part of the mainstream media anymore. You're the only person who is. And there is a lot of flack which the mainstream gets from a section, right? Which believes that there's not enough resources for investigation. Is that really true? Have the resources really come down? Or is it just a matter of time? Like nobody's able to focus on something for a long time?
Yeah. So the lack of focus, I don't think is anything new. I mean, news cycle is very short. And so, memory is also really short. And that is not a new thing. That has always been the case for media in general, and definitely for mainstream media. But what you were asking about, do we have the resources? What do we do going forward? Yes, I think there is a reluctance to let people work for a long time and over a long time on a story, or let them go out and report, traveling everywhere and having to fund their travel. I think there is some amount of reluctance to do that because, most of those stories which are done after so much work also has so little traction. So, it's like a one-off story unless you are able to really go on and on. And that rarely happens. Especially in mainstream, you rarely get the space for doing that kind of thing. But having said that, I can't complain because I have actually stayed with issues and done stories over and over again, and I've got the space. And
I've been her colleague, so she's an exceptional institution there. I don't think she has any reporting bosses to report to. Nobody asks questions. Yeah.
No, but so I think there are people even in mainstream who still stay with stories and still get the space, and honestly, I have I think long form stories are a problem in a newspaper, so it's difficult to find space. So you try to work around that. You have to find ways of dealing with that. So which is basically you break down stories into smaller components. And since at least there is a slight resistance to doing series, because series is also committing that amount of space to. So what you do is you don't even call it series, but then you stick to an issue and then you sort of pace it. But you keep coming back to the issue which you think is important. I think that, you do find, basically, you have to become a lot more creative about how you find spaces for these things and how you are going to reframe your story so that you can keep going after the same issue again and again and again. And sometimes for years, I can tell you that I have done stories on the same issue for years. And it's basically that, for example, I mean, after every budget, I think we do a story saying health budget has been cut. And everybody knows, yes, health budget has been cut. But the government will immediately say, this is the biggest we have ever allocated to health. But we all know that, I mean, the only reason why the health budget is what it is because of the health cess. And that's like a sleight of hand because the government had always told us that health cess was to top up the regular budget. But we know that that's not what is being done. Instead, the health budget is cut and the cess is being used to hide the fact that you have actually cut the budget. So, I mean, this story we do year after year after year in various ways. I mean, you say the same thing over and over again. I don't know. I mean, calling out the government is important. And I think no matter, even if there is no impact, I mean, I don't think that as journalists, we have the luxury to say, oh, the story hasn't made an impact, so I'm going to stop writing about it. No, your job is to keep writing about it. And not to and try and find new ways of saying it, but you can't give up saying there's no impact and so I'm going to stop writing about this issue. I don't think we can do that. You have to keep calling out the government. I mean, the government will keep ignoring you. At some point, you're hoping that there is a tipping point where, there's so much against, what you have written that there will be a change. I've seen that happen, but again, like I said, not always for good. So I don't know. Sometimes the change that you wish to see, like they say, be careful what you wish for. Like, for example, Medical Council of India got disbanded, which was good. It was a very corrupt organization, but it's been replaced by an even more corrupt or inept organization. So I don't know. Should we be feeling good about it? No. But at the same time, do we say that, but then what we did, has not led to a good outcome? Our job, I think we'll have to start writing about NMC then, and you keep at NMC and you keep pointing out what's the problem with them. I don't see any way around it. You can just keep calling the government out on all the claims that they make when they say, they keep renaming schemes. They'll tell you that, they have set aside so much money for schemes. And then you have to just keep digging and find out that, that's a lie. And I think in most mainstream papers, they would hate to use the word lie. So you have to say it politely. But you have to say it anyway. You just have to find ways of saying it.
But how much are we relying on, say, because the government is so thick-skinned and forget, actually sacking people or taking any action. They won't even inquire into the allegations despite proof. So is there now too much reliance on, say, opposition to at least take this up so it reaches a larger number of people? And if that does happen, then it's given the color of, oh, this is political, this report is from the opposition side, it's a plant and all that. Is that a concern?
If it is a question to me, I think in India, you should realize that every scandal has a certain period because, it's like making pickle. It has to age for a few years. So in Bofors, if you see, it's by 87, it happens, 89, it brings political change. 2G scam, 2008, the scam happens. 2010, it begins to get public attention. All of it. So if you look at most of India's political scandals, it takes 2-3 years of regular cooking, somebody being, as Rema said, persistent in getting it to the masses and making it conversation point. Even the most thick-skinned government, which thinks that everything's in control, will at some point will have to give it. It may be public agitation, it may be opposition, whatever it is, or some good jet somewhere. We don't know what it is, but 2-3 things are important. To add to what Rema said, one, we have to be persistent, consistent, even when we think that nobody is reading us. We should keep doing the story and be at it. That's very important. Second thing is, I think opposition has a legitimate role in democracy. All political graphs are very similar, except for actually Modi governments, universally. And it's very interesting to study what is happening and how much of it is linked to the faulty electoral rolls. A party gains, opposition gains, and it wins elections, and then its popularity goes up because they will announce some very appealing schemes, etc. Good governance kicks in, and then it plateaus out and it goes down. Modi government is at the plateau and it keeps jumping up between in terms of vote share or victory. That is where our concern should be, because that is very unnatural. Even if you don't have opposition, because in first past post system, we usually, people vote out the governments, not vote in. Vote in was what only once Rajiv Gandhi was voted in out of sympathy, but otherwise it's always vote out. So I don't know. So there is something larger to be discussed, investigated. What is the reason for Modi's popularity when joblessness, unemployment, economic growth, everything is story. But I'm saying that we should not give heed to any allegations that we are doing something by the opposition or the foreign powers, etc. That's the standard tool book. I don't think we should be bothered. That's a tool book used in Hungary, in Turkey, in Russia, everywhere. So in fact, some of the best Russian journalists are no more in Russia. Not, in fact, all of them. They're all out, right? So it's all part of this standard playbook and joke. So I don't think we should worry. We should be active doing stories and stories and stories and stories. And the most important stories. For example, it's very important to do the health stories, what Rama said, but it's also equally important, which for us, especially the independent newsrooms with less resource, to put the energy on the biggest elephant in the room, the Adani, the state capture, the institutional capture, those kind of few elements that are big, which will actually set everything in place. So I think the dam will burst. It has to. And I think until then, we will have to every morning get up in the hope that today is the last day before the change. Because if you don't have that optimism, you can't do it. But I just want to add a completely different thing, which is, I think in my mind, it's very important, nobody's discussing. From Hickey's Gazette, India has a very long history of investigative journalism. You know, he took on the East India Company. If you look at the landmark investigations, for example, Bofors. So what Chitra did was very classic traditional investigation. You have got a source, you get information, go meet people. Then when people like us were doing companies, etc., we got company documents, read, etc. So the sophistication of investigations were picking up. But if you see what has happened since Modi came to power, is a dramatic upswing in the complexity of investigations. And that is why I'm saying it's a golden era. And that is why also, even if the mainstream, like an Indian Express or others, want to come back and join this game, they will have to reskill, upskill, retool themselves to catch up. Because we have a set of generation of reporters who have breached Mauritius, brought out some of the most complex financial transactions of Adani in stock market manipulation. We have people who are, the kind of SIR investigations in Bihar to date. I know that the data extraction by some of the journalists were at 99.0% accuracy. And they're doing extractions which even some of the opposition parties are not able to do. So there is a large amount of upskilling that's happening. And today, if you see, some of our independent reporters are on a regular basis sharing bylines with global newspapers and their reporters. So the game has changed. Even if tomorrow Modi era ends and the mainstream media wants to catch up and do great investigations, both their nursery school will not suffice. Because these guys, the few of them who are doing today, are really breaking new grounds. And I think that is the most glaring part to me. The rest is all side noise.
Yeah, I think also we should just slightly discuss on what more can we do, right? Like, I think when I look at your GIJN's website, which is the Global Investigative Journalism Network, there are so many techniques that people across the world, investigative journalists across the world are using. Here, I think we have very limited resources. It's only very few people who even have these resources. Nikita, yeah?
Yeah, just to kind of add to what you were saying, I think there was a period in which a certain kind of journalism had started to feel extremely lonely. I think even for independent organizations, many of which are now dealing with all manner of state action, for journalists who are being hounded and persecuted in different ways. And so even the collaborations that Joldi is sort of, and this ecosystem that has sort of, it's like this ragtag army of people who've sort of come together and it's sustaining itself. And these collaborations are also making the job a little less lonely. But at the same time, I think while you have a small bunch of folks who are doing, like Josie said, extremely complex work, one of the things that I have been noticing, and I think is something to maybe pay attention to, is that because we are also witnessing a hyper-visible era of journalism, which is to say that a lot of what gets read is often now tied down to, for instance, a social media presence, a certain kind of amplification that happens. And I do think that we are also running the risk at large of less rigor. There's something that a good, like any investigative mentor will tell you, which is that you have to treat every fact as suspect. You have to treat every assertion as suspect. And you see this in all kinds of investigative journalism around the world. But I think even within independent journalists right now, because it almost feels sometimes it is natural to feel like we are firefighting. And in that firefighting, sometimes we forget to apply the kind of scrutiny and the kind of care that we need to, because whether or not we like it, our investigations are going to be held to a higher standard. And if we fail to uphold that standard, now whether that means taking more time on a story, whether that means double checking what your sources have told you, whether that means backing everything you have with documentation, I think we do need to focus a little bit more on that kind of training, more journalists, because I do sometimes feel like we've missed that sort of school of journalism is on the decline at large. Because there's also a pressure of getting things out fast, so on and so forth. The other thing is that across the world, you're seeing legacy establishments also, we are seeing their moral superiority in many ways also crumble. Whether it is the fact that there are West-focused institutions, whether it's what we've seen with the coverage of the genocide on Palestine. And so independent journalism all over seems to be on the rise, but not just independent journalism, but also now independent journalism that's going to be focused on, for instance, the Global South, because we're no longer content to have parachuting journalists come in and flatten a very complex story out, right? So that to me seems like a larger pattern, but the question of training and the question of time, I think, is also paramount.
Rama, your last thoughts, because for me, sometimes I feel like there's a lot of intent, not for everyone, but at least there is a bunch of, of journalists who do want to do a lot of work. For me personally, because Pooja asked at the beginning, what do I think? I think for me, the biggest highlight was a lot of organizations coming together and pooling resources. See, for us, it's no longer about who does the story, but whether it's the Scroll, News Laundry, The Wire, whether it's Mook Nayak, Article 14, we all talk to each other, even the Caribbean. We help each other in whatever ways possible. We collaborate because we want to bring our strengths together, right? And it's not just about visibility. It is about each person has their strength. For example, almost every day morning, I would message Seema of The Wire saying, can we republish the story? Or she would message me saying, can we republish the story? So many times we work together on the ground. I think that is one aspect which has really made things better in 2024 and 25. And there's a bunch of independent journalists also who we have worked with in many things like electoral bonds to even the Bihar election, right? But what does make me feel like we can do more and we are not able to is the lack of technologies and the lack of tools and the lack of training. I mean, it's not like the technology and the tools can't be not made available, but we never spend enough time to train people on all that, which will enable them to do better journalism, bigger stories. Rama, you have any thoughts on that?
In some sense, I think Josie is right in saying that mainstream has a lot to catch up in terms of, technical skills. We are still, I think, bound by the same kind of reporting and the same cycle of reporting, whereas the skills required to do much more analytical stuff is of a different level altogether. I mean, for a simple example, I struggle to understand annual reports and stocks and shares of, now that all the hospital companies are going, there are mergers and acquisitions happening. There is a lot of private equity inflow into hospitals. So what are the implications of these things? To understand that, often you're struggling and you're... but the good thing is, of course, like all journalists, what you do is when you don't understand, you go to somebody who understands and tell them to sit you down and explain those things. But it would be so much better if I could actually understand it myself and you could then possibly see the patterns better. Those kind of trainings, I think, would be great. I mean, if we could do it, I don't see any organization sort of investing in that sort of hardcore training that is needed in the new world. And I wish, especially all the organizations that in the mainstream, I wish they would also take the lead in spending for those kind of training, which would be good. But I don't think, because, right now, what we are doing is just, we are doing the same things over and over again. We do the same kind of reporting. But to go to the next level, as Josie said, I think it will take some catching on. And the new lot, anyway, all the young people who are now taking up journalism would rather be in the digital space than in legacy media. And that's a fact. And there's a reason for that. So, because they're also more excited about using newer tools rather than, the same old kind of reporting. So, that's something that I guess mainstream will have to look in.
Yeah, but I also feel like the instability of working independently has made many journalists entrepreneurial. Like you rarely know any journalist who's doing and working outside legacy media unless they have some sort of alternative ecosystem to rely on. Like they're all having to work different kinds of jobs. So on top of all of these things to, think about, the financial hardship right now for many journalists is very real. And we've lost so many colleagues from the profession simply because it was not sustainable for them.
That's a huge problem, I think. I know that a lot of people have left journalism because of that. Because it's difficult to sustain like that, sustain with that level of unpredictability and expecting that, you will freelance and you will make a go of thing. And to be on your feet and be independent is really hard when you're freelancing. And I have friends who freelance and I've seen the struggle. They don't get paid on time. They don't know where the next gig is going to come from, whether somebody will accept a pitch or not. It's tough.
And on that, independent and legacy establishments are equal opportunity offenders, So, Sorry, Josie, what were you saying?
No, I was asking, is that why you sell cakes?
I just bake for free. I do have a flatmate who bakes excellent cakes and sells them.
I was saying from the point of view of audience, I've spoken to people, both readers and viewers, who feel that because we are living in an era where there is so much of information overload that happens and the attention spans getting shorter and shorter, we're breaking down complex documents, complex concepts, and despite us doing our best to simplify it, I feel like somewhere some things are getting lost in translation. That could be one reason why people are not consuming investigative journalistic reports as much as they should. I think that's form is one thing we can pay a little bit more attention to without oversimplifying and dumbing it down. Can we make it more accessible to our readers? Because it's not just for us that we're doing this work, right? It has to reach the people. I think that's one area where we can introspect a bit more.
Okay, so anyway, everybody thinks investigative journalism is doing considerably well. I thought we'll have this really mournful session where lots of people are saying investigative journalism is dead, nobody's doing it anymore, India has no future, journalism has no future. But at least here are 5 people who think that work is happening. It needs more amplification, it needs more consistency. Of course, a lot more work has to happen. I personally think we only do, media is only 20% of what it's actually capable of. Just a random number I'm throwing. Yeah. So we'll come to a close of this week's episode. I will go to everyone for their recommendations. I'll start with Josie because we started with you.
I just watched the New York 100, the documentary on Netflix. It's a very affectionate ode to a great institution, which has actually played a very important role in redefining long-form investigative journalism in the world. So it just started. It's available on Netflix. It started last week. It came on. I just watched as soon as it came. Please watch.
One book that I think is investigative but isn't looked as one is P. Sainath's Everybody Loves a Good Drought. That's one book I suggest people read. And a series that I think people should watch is called The Newsroom, because every time you feel very bleak about the future of journalism, it's dramatic and all of that, but we could use a little bit of drama in life. So, yeah.
So I actually really enjoyed reading the Caravan's media issue this month. There's of course the story on Rajdeep Sardesai and also the story on Outlook, which are the 2 stories I've finished so far. And the Outlook one, to me at least, was interesting because this is an institution that we all remember as upholding a kind of defiant, muckraking journalism. I And I actually found the responses of the current editor to the questionnaires very interesting because to at least 2 questions, I think she has responded saying, is it bad manners to ask this? And journalism is really not, it shouldn't be about good manners. It should be fair, but it's not about good manners. So I really liked reading that. And there's an interesting, because Pooja brought up Newsroom, it's not a great series, but it is an interesting one. In Hindi, it's called Broken News. It has Jaideep Alawat and it has Sonali Bendre and Shia Palgaonkar. And a lot of it is, of course, extremely exaggerated and doesn't really hold up to like a good tight narrative. But they've snuck in a lot of dissenting commentary that I think just completely got missed. Like there's a big tech tycoon who's sort of trying to launch a surveillance operation. There is some sort of commentary on electoral bonds. So yeah, I mean, it's worth watching. I think sometimes, like how Rama was saying, when you're in the mainstream, you have to be so much more inventive in how you're slipping in criticism. So to me, this was an interesting example of that.
It's inspired by the British series, no? Press.
Yeah, but it's got a lot of Indian references. I was personally very surprised to see even the amount that they had put in, because you're just used to not seeing that anymore. So yeah.
So I'm told by a lot of people that nobody likes to read anymore. So in fact, I mean, every time I write something, I have doctors calling me up and saying, "Aap reel kyun nahi bana lete? Why don't you make reel? People will understand better. Nobody is reading the stuff you write." So keeping that in mind, I would say, I mean, if you think that video is what you like, then I would suggest go to the journalism school. Or almost all of their journalism schools now have their course curriculum online, and they had fabulous recommendations for films to watch. And so you can basically go and collect all the stuff and start watching them rather than, if you don't like reading, I mean, that's the best thing to do. They have some great recommendations and you can actually find them.
Imagine Josie doing a reel on some Adani story. It'll like end before you begin. But yeah, my son is 14 years old. His only, the only thing that he can do with his hands is this. This is up. No other action. So at home, the punishment for him is sit and watch a movie for 2.5 hours. Because to do something which is beyond 3 minutes is a punishment now. So that's a big punishment. Since Josie is here, we have to recommend his book, Feast of Vultures. Please read it.
And second, Silent.
Yeah, but I think Feast of Vultures better. So I'm recommending that. I also want...
Please recommend my next word, which is coming.
Oh yeah, your next book is coming, right? Yeah. So between all this, Josie finds time to write books also. I also want to just re-recommend, considering all that has been happening. Yeah, all that has been happening in Kerala, this New Yorker piece on the Giselle Pellicott rape trial. It's called A Chat Room Behind the Pellicott Rape Trial. I think I've recommended this once before, but I think that's really essential reading if you want to understand a lot of things which is happening in India also now, where we talk about consent and non-consent and all that. So these are my 2 recommendations. So everybody's done with recommendations. Thank you very much. This has been a very chaotic recording of South Central. Thank you to Josie. Thanks to StreamYard and Zoom. Yes, Josie, yes?
I had one recommendation, I think, Rema, and everybody. I mean, I think we should really look at the entry of private equity into the hospital space. I think
Yes.
we are moving into a massive crisis, even in a state like Kerala. The way private equity is sweeping in and taking hospitals, I think that's our next big crisis.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, we had a discussion a few weeks ago with P.V. Ramesh, who was the health secretary of Andhra Pradesh, who's been writing vehemently against how even private medical colleges and hospitals are being handed over for this private MOUs, right? Karnataka is doing it, Andhra Pradesh is doing it. So he spoke about how this is like the death for healthcare for the poorer sections, because you don't know what a private company is going to do after 10 years, 15 years, though they will sign some MOU now.
And anyway, you have a terrible record. I mean, all governments have a terrible record of holding anybody to an MOU. So if you don't have such a proven track record, then why would you promote that?
Yes. So thank you very much, everyone. Keep tuning into South Central. And thank you all for the work you do more than anything else, not just for joining South Central. Have a good week to the listeners and watchers of the South Central. Thank you.